Well, welcome once again to this winter event in the Poem Present series. Devin Johnson will be introducing Lisa Jarnot. We are welcoming Devin back to the University of Chicago, a recent PhD in English, now professor at St. Louis University, and former poetry editor at the Chicago Review, and himself a poet. Please welcome Devin Johnson to welcome Lisa.
Thanks. I also work for Flood Editions, which just published Lisa's most recent book, Black Dog Songs, and it's for sale at the back. Lisa's also the author of 2 previous books of poetry, Some Other Kind of Mission and Ring of Fire. She's writing a biography of the poet Robert Duncan, and she's just recently finished a novel called Promise X that's forthcoming, and that I believe she's going to read from some tonight. I'm mainly responding to her poetry here. In Lisa's catalogs and inventories, one readily thinks of Whitman, or at least I do. Sheer evidence overwhelms argument. We experience the fullness of the phenomenal world, the fullness of all that impinges on experience. Her poetry is endlessly eventful. Yet habits of thought give shape to that fullness. The mind circles back, for better or for worse, in the same patterns. We're driven by modules of speech that get repeated. Love, or beside, or as if. We're led by rhyme to find the shape of experience. I think of Whitman's exuberance in the face of what he saw in his time, the broken promises of society and law. In Song of Myself, he declares, I think I could turn and live a while with the animals. They are so placid and self-contained. I stand and look at them sometimes half the day long. I think Lisa might declare as much, but Whitman didn't turn and live with them, as far as I know, and she hasn't yet. Lisa's a poet of great imagination, delight, and even whimsy, yet she never turns from, in Ezra Pound's phrase, what is happening. Thus Rumsfeld and Cheney and Bush find their place among the hounds, horses, pigeons, rats, and cows. Beyond I think, therefore I am, or even I am I because my little dog knows me, Lisa writes, I am of a family because my dog knows me. In addition to its music and delight, such an expansive, honest sense of the relations makes Black Dog Songs an important book for me. As Blake says, for better or for worse, we impose on one another. Here's Lisa Jarnot.
Thanks, Devin. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, everybody. It's good to see everybody here. And I am going to read poems, and then I'm going to read a little bit from this novel that I'm finishing. And I was thinking about what Devin was saying. He gave me this idea now that I have this new direction to go off with the animals. So I'm always looking for something new to do. So anyway, this is, I'm kind of thinking today in this autobiographical way. And so I picked out these poems that are, for me, resonating with childhood in some way. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, so this poem is called Hockey Night in Canada. Oh, Canada, you are melancholy today, and so am I. And here's the giant metal airplane that fills the sky above the steam heat of my dreams, beside decisions, well between the quiet that's between us. And also, do you think of the hibiscus on your roadsides, Dutch, like bags of carrots, still heroic, wrapped in snow upon the tiny screens that show it to you, particular neighbor who breathes, alive, asleep, beside the surface of the ice upon the moon in silver deep. Devin, what was that thing about Whitman and the animals?
The quote from Whitman?
No, what did you say about living with the animals?
That Whitman, I don't think he actually did this.
Oh, okay.
Maybe he did.
I have 2 cats. Does that count?
Yes.
Yes. Elegy for my tomato plants. Transcendent late-night seeds in front of the fireplace, there is a family of man and a family of you, plant, tomato, lettuces, pit bull, bullfrog, coyote, and the moon. But who listens, and who, awake at the seed bed, rouses all the meaning of the meeting of the seeds inside the dirt, of rock songs, of car wheels, of flea bane, of the aster and the shale, irregular in its regularity, regular in its irregularity, a weeping cherry tree, a sound beside a pond. See, I have 2 books and they're the same color. I have to get this right. Okay, this is called Lisa Jarnot. When you do grow up, you'll be able to write poems, and things will be like they are now, except there will be more sardines, and all the grilled cheese sandwiches on white bread will move away, and it may still snow on cold nights when the dogs bark, wrestling in the dark, but all the stars are the same, and you are the same, still wavering in the hall light, unbridled light nor dark. On the sublime. They loved these things. Giraffe, they loved giraffe. They loved the concept of the taper. They loved him, wholly unnamed. They loved competence, and they loved the dark metallic stapler. They loved to trace the trajectory of the armadillo. They loved to speak of plankton. They also loved the fog. You know, I actually hadn't planned it this way, but these are all animal poems, so it kind of works out. This is called Seal Ode, and this is the story of Seal Ode. I have a younger brother who wanted to be a Navy SEAL, so he had the Navy SEAL workout video. So I used to watch it, you know, but then it was, you know, do the workout or write a poem. So I wrote the poem instead. Seal Ode. A person with a strong neck is a strong person, and a strong seal is a person with a necklace of a seal. The necklace of a person in a sealskin is forgotten in the person with the strong neck that is shiny like a seal. And shiny in the rain, a sealed and shiny neck of persons, it is stronger than a seal is sold inside the seal-made rain. The seal coat rained on in the rain is seal-like and is stronger than the necks of men with sealskin in the seal hat seasoned rain. Did we lose somebody already? Is that what happened? It's kind of hot in here. Right? Maybe that's what it is. This is a poem called "Dumb Duke Death." I wrote this for Dick Cheney. I think it's kind of a spell, and I wanted to read it because this book got reviewed in the. One of these books got reviewed in the Times Literary Supplement, and they said this was a really stupid poem. So, whatever. Okay. Dumb Duke Death. for Dick Cheney. Down, dire, death day, dim dale, ding dong. Dip down, dame, chase, cheap date, dance, dodge. Do dive, dull duck, do doze, dork, deal. Door, dirge, chip, cheer, dusk, do, duke, duel. Dab, dash, chin, chink, dim, dark, dog, dawn. Dank, dive, deep, debt, dour, dose, deem, dead. Ding, dong, dug, dirt, ditch, dib, chimp, chore. Damp, dank, death, do, dead, deal, duck, dell. Do, deem, dawn, down, dark, deep, dog, dawn. Dig, ditch, deed done, dead, duke, ding, dong. Right speech. The opening line of this is actually from an essay by a poet named Robin Blazer. Right speech. Love, which is meaning, compels speech. Speech, which is human, compels mammals. From the trees of the language of the mammals, from the mailbox where they rise, speakers, hugged close to the forest fires late at night, tigers, cicadas, and trees. Name of the one who is love compels speech, which is meaning, from trees, to be mammals, mammalian, made of music, made of tigers with the flames, rising up from the gardens of the naming of the night, giant, speaking to me, content with this, the trees with tigers and with corn, the hot spell of speaking speech, the language laced with tigers, laced with night. Okay. More animals, dogs mostly. Hound pastoral. Of the hay in the barn and the hound in the field. Of the bay and the sound of the hound in the field. Of the back of the field, of the bay and the front of the field. Of the back of the hound and the front of the hound and the sound of the hound when he bays at the sound in the field. With the baying of hounds in the baying of arms in the field. Of the hound on the page and the sound of the hound in the field. Of the hay that unrests near the hound in the barn in the field. Of the bend in the barn, in the sound of the hound, in the bay by the barn in the field. When I was putting this reading together this afternoon, I realized that the most repeated images were of dogs and also Abraham Lincoln. I don't really know what that means, but so this is called Greyhound Ode. I should tell a little bit about this poem. I was on a bus trip to North Carolina a couple of years ago, and it was kind of late at night, and there was this little kid running up and down the aisles. So I wrote this for him. Greyhound Ode. Go to sleep, little doggy, while the moon is still foggy, and the wild dogs all bark by the light of the moon. By the moon, little doggy, under streetlights so foggy, while the wild dogs all bark by the moon, by the moon. At the waters so foggy, little doggy, go to sleep, little doggy, by the light of the moon. Okay, I'm going to read one more poem. It's called Future Poem. No dogs. Okay, but yeah. Anyway, future poem. Straight out of the Abraham Lincoln Place in the middle of a primary election year, which is snow inside the mind, outside the tree, and on the screen. And if I were a cat, I would scratch my ears all day and wear a flannel shirt and have a mate named Jimmy, and we'd float away in a beautiful pea-green boat that is just a dream, like the old people say, out in their old poems, out in the field. And we are busy up outside, inside our dreamscape with our boats. Don't bother me, Agamemnon. I am busy with my boat. Okay, so those are the poems, and now you have to stretch, because I'm going to read a little bit more other stuff. So I would stretch or do your thing. Okay. I've been working on this novel. It's called Promise X, and I started working on this a little bit after that whole September 11th thing. And I was feeling in a lot of ways like the only way to write about the darkness that we live in this country was to actually enter into it in some way and to feel some tenderness within that space, and to have some sympathy for what happens in that space. And so the main narrative of the story is that the main character is a psychotherapy patient / terrorist who is adopted by her psychoanalyst. Okay, that's the groundwork, right? That's all you need to know, I think. Okay. And it's now 5:55, so I'm going to read this for about 15 minutes or so, maybe a little bit longer. Just want you to know. You know why people do that at readings? So that, like, you don't freak out and you don't think it's like 4 hours of stuff coming up, you know? So, just so you can pace yourself, right? Okay. 1. At a point in my life when most of my friends were burying their dads, I was meeting mine for the first time. I should tell you that he wasn't my real dad, but that he was someone who came to say that he was my dad and that I believed him and that he believed me, and that we thought we were part of a family together, and that's how this all began. I should tell you that it was on a Wednesday afternoon in the middle of May, when the weather was turning warm and I was walking up 7th Avenue in New York City, past the yellow discount clothing stores, past the delis with their coffee and their bacon, eggs and ham, past the push carts and the briefcases and cars. It was on a day when I was feeling like I did on most days then, unhappy and looking toward the sunlight and hoping I could find out what was wrong. It was that day that began this story of me and the person I came to call my dad in the middle of May in the springtime in New York. I should explain that I didn't know very much about him then, and I didn't know that he would be my dad. I should explain that he had an office in Midtown near Times Square on the west side of the street, in the shadow of the blue and purple neon, on the 9th floor of a building at the end of a long corridor in an office called 9A. I should explain that he was a psychoanalyst, and that was what I knew, that I was unhappy, that the sun was in the sky, and that I might as well talk to someone like him, a psychoanalyst, at the end of the long corridor in the office called 9A. I should explain that what was wrong with me was what had always been wrong, ever since I was a little kid, that I thought I was terribly sick as anyone could be who kills people and destroys cities and ruins the whole world. And maybe I thought I always had been sick, and maybe it was true, like my mother must have thought that I was sick, like the other people thought so too, the rows of teachers and the bus drivers and the grocery clerks and also all my friends and all the people who ever said to me on the street, "Why are you so unhappy?" which I often was. which was why I knew that I was sick, which was why I made an appointment with him, the psychoanalyst, so that I could tell him of how sick I was, so that he could fix me like a car in a garage on that springtime day, where the elevators were brown and cold and shiny silver, and the hallways were cool and dark and green. And at the end of the long corridor was where he was, in a swirling, ragged office chair, with a smile on his face, with his eyes the darkest color, like an animal or God or the devil, which is who I came to think he'd be. I can tell you that he had a name which was Ari Theodore, which I didn't use because I didn't think I should, since I was afraid of him, since I was afraid to even say his name, so I didn't say anything about his name or about him, nor did I look at him very much, since I was frightened on those days in May, on Tuesday and Wednesday afternoons when I went there, and I didn't say very much about what I knew about myself, that I was born in a certain place at a certain time, that I now lived in another place, that I didn't think that anybody liked me, that I didn't like myself, that I often was quite sad, that maybe I was a destroyer of all things called love, that I wanted to know about him and about love and about myself, but that I was afraid to learn to love myself or him or anyone at all. I can tell you about my sickness, or about what my sickness must have seemed to me, or about what I was told by all of my friends at the time. I, Tippy Larkin of New York City, who has been convinced of strange and bitter things. I can tell you that it once felt good to say, I am a terrorist and I like for things to die. I can tell you that I have been, by nature and by breeding and by birth, an easily humiliated person. A humiliation queen, some people would say, like a lot of people are humiliated, driven into and out of humiliations of various shapes and sizes, beginning from the beginning of their humiliating lives, being born, being weaned, having siblings, being yelled at for being so fucking stupid, being poor, being unlovable, like I thought I was when I was just a kid. I can tell you that partly that's what made me who I thought I was, since I was groomed to have a terroristic streak, and since I, like the rest of the world, lacked the character to stop myself from seeking my revenge, which was so pleasant and so painful, which is why it exists in the world, revenge and its dark-eyed revengers. I can tell you that none of this was what I knew then on that day in May when I went to meet Mr. Theodore, who later told me he would be my dad. And I can tell you that no one then, on that afternoon in May, could have told me of the terrorist I was or the terrorist that Mr. Theodore would become, and that no one could have told me much of anything back then, since maybe I would seek to get revenge, slowly or quickly, because I could and since I had to, because that is who I thought that I might be. I can tell you when it all started, when I think that it all started, on the day that I was born a long time ago, and there was a war going on in Vietnam, and a war going on in Palestine, and the Buffalo Bills lost a football game in Miami, and I was in a hospital in some part of the country, industrial, near one of the Great Lakes, and I cried all the time, or at least that's what my mother liked to say, that I was already unfeedable and unlovable, that I was anxious, and that I've been sad and lonely ever since. I can tell you that there was snow on the ground and that I was wrapped in pink blankets and baptized and washed in the kitchen sink. I can tell you what the psychiatrists say to tell me why I'm sad, which is that I'm sick, like a genetic mutant or a person with a terrible disease. Sadness number 296.32, major depressive disorder recurrent. Sadness number 300.02, generalized anxiety disorder. Sadness number 301.83, borderline personality disorder. Sadness number 309.21, separation anxiety disorder, which is reserved for kids, which I still am one, even though I'm trying to grow up. I can tell you that the scientists of sadness say that my sadnesses are solvable through pills and through science, the slow motion pills of sadness stopping, the weary, drooling pills of hospitals and morgues, the cellophane wrapper over my eyes and ears pills in white and pink and happy names, the not quite awake and not quite asleep pills, the twilight zone of pills, chemical straitjackets, mood-enhancing psychostimulants, from Prozac to Provigil through all the spectrum in between. I can tell you what the scientists of sadness would say and how they would say it, crouched like runners behind their clipboards with their crumpled uptown suits. You seem to be saying that you still have days during which you feel depressed. It surprises me to hear you say that you're not depressed, because I think that many people would agree with me that in looking at you, you certainly seem to be depressed. What I'm saying is that you're still experiencing a certain level of depression. There's no reason you can't take a whole pill. It's something that can be treated with medication. You need to be in touch with me right away. It's important for you to contact me if you start to feel worse. And I always said okay, but I didn't know what was right, or if I needed to be so sick for so long, forever, or if I was really sick at all, or if I had simply convinced myself that I was sick, unlike the other people in the world who seemed to go about their lives, like Mr. Theodore, who talked to me in a different way than any scientist ever had, or my mother, or even all my friends, which was part of why I liked him when I went to meet him on that day in the springtime in New York inside of May, that my sadness was not what he cared about at all, and that this was not what he thought of the world, that it was filled with pills, but he knew that it was filled with other things. And as for me, there was something that he said he knew, that we both knew on that day, that we looked at each other and we knew each other's sadness somehow, and that we thought we could find it more, that sadness that we shared, and a certain kind of happiness, which makes this the story of me and a person who I thought of as my dad, which is hard to say if it's a good story or a bad story or somewhere in between, which is a story about me and myself and him and his self and the places we converge. And I should explain that this is a story of many parts of me and many parts of him that began on that day when he was in his work clothes in his place of work, looking lemonade-colored and khaki, with his feet up on a footrest in the middle of the room, with his black-white hair and his black-white eyes and his devil face and grin, with all of the sky to be around us, since this is about all of those things, about silence and noise and anger and of love. Stalker. I used to stalk my mother when I was a little kid, which is how I got to be good at it. And I used to stalk Anton, and I used to stalk Glenn, and I used to stalk a lot of other people, which is how I got good at doing research, since I had subjects that I loved or hated, depending on your point of view. And I met Anton at around the same time that Glenn and I broke up, which was just when I met Todd, who was a rock star, kind of. Like Mr. Theodore's second wife, was kind of like a film star. But then Glenn and I got back together, even though he was married to someone else. And there were all 6 of us in there, me and Anton and Todd and his wife and Glenn and his wife too, who I didn't know about. And it was complicated, especially since we had all seen each other peripherally from different parts of our lives. Like Todd knew Glenn, and Glenn knew Todd, and Todd knew Glenn's first wife, who left him with the help of Todd, which Glenn didn't know about. And Anton knew that his mom had fucked Glenn, after I told him at least, which made him pretty mad. And Todd knew that Anton's dad and Glenn had been best friends, and Anton's dad, who was dead, didn't know that Glenn had fucked his wife. And Todd was someone Anton thought was cool, since he was a rock star. And Glenn found out that I was fucking Todd and wanted to kill him. And I found out that Glenn was married, and I wanted to kill him and to kill her while I lived with him. And his other wife came by during the day, and I lived there with him at night. And that was around the time I went to meet Mr. Theodore, who became my dad, who was the 7th person in the play, who was the 7th seal, not like in the Bible, but more like in a zoo. And Glenn's new wife was Korean, and her name was Pearl. And I never met her, but I saw a lot of photographs of her and him and their friends, which they used to get her green card. And she was married to someone else who lived down in the South, who was also from another country. And she had a kid she left in Seoul. And Glenn had met her through his previous girlfriend, who was also Korean, who he lived with for 9 years, and they seemed to hate each other or something. Or that's what people said, since she always scratched his face and he always pulled her hair. And neither of them could cook. And sometimes I found Glenn in the morning in the kitchen with a knife inside the toaster, trying to get at the toast. And I knew our days were numbered, or at least his were. And 3 weeks later, after his ex-girlfriend left, I was his love, but he was still sleeping with her, his Korean girlfriend and his Korean wife. And as for handsome Anton, he was like one of the Kennedys, and I was his Marilyn Monroe, since I was crazy and he was noble, and since I slept with Frankie, too, his brother, who was younger and was easier to stalk since he looked like Abraham Lincoln. And I tried to get them both out of my life, my stalking instinct and the brothers who I fucked, since they were mad at me, which is what Mr. Theodore helped me through, since I was in what he would sometimes call a pickle, as in, you've gotten yourself into a real pickle, so let's see if we can get you out. Which was the equivalent of being a clown in a rodeo and waving a bright flag, the bright flag Mr. Theodore, who eventually I charged for, which is why he thought that he should then adopt me, since he was crazy, since he wanted to have a mad bull like me inside his house, like I'd been inside the houses of the other people when I tried to steal their souls, like Dracula came for Mina Harker, raising my fists against Anton and then telling him to die, climbing into Glenn's house when he was not around, until he came home and extracted me by brandishing a knife, which I could draw out of people, a knife-wielding madness, which made me think that I was just like Osama bin Laden, that I could make my mother hate me too, at the origins of who I was in my terrorist technique. To give the rage to her I felt when she had gone away, since she had gone away sometimes when I was just a kid, and since she had told my father that she was never coming back, when she slammed the door and left me there with him, like my first boyfriend, Paulie Ford, who poisoned his mom's tea. But I didn't do that, since my revenge was of a slow and painful sort, and it took centuries, condemning my victims to live like me, the undead that I was. From my mother, who forgot to pick me up from school. From my mother, who was always there and not there, who would always show up late, who was never coming back, which was what she said, which confused me when I was just yet big enough to walk. So I followed her, my vampire mother who disappeared at night. And I followed all her footsteps, and I looked for her and stalked like a bloodhound, like I learned to follow people in my head, to move in with a new family, without the fleas that swarmed at the foot of the bed between the guinea pig and Finch, in the circus house, where I had learned to take my sick revenge day after day, pausing at the side door when the school bus came in view, hiding in the closet while I waited for my mother to come home, to ask her the same questions every day. Do you still like me? Are you still mad at me? Will you make me know I'm real? Which is what I said to Mr. Theodore when he told me that he would be my mom, because I was panicked and it seemed like he had gone away. Okay, so, you guys still with me for a second more? Okay, I'm going to read one more little chapter here, just to close this out. This is called Osama bin Laden. It's a little bit darker, but I'm going to read it. It starts with a quote from a poem by Jack Spicer from the Holy Grail. If someone doesn't fight me, I'll have to wear this armor all of my life. They call him the awe produced by the shadow of God upon the earth, and he is my brother too. Which is why I was so happy when the World Trade Center blew up and then burned down. Which secretly I think that Abby Hoffman would have thought was something special too, even though Noam Chomsky said that no one here could think that it was good. But I thought it was good, in a sincere and vicious way, and I went up on my rooftop and I danced beneath the planes, like no one else did on any of the rooftops I could see, while people were flying through the air on fire, like birds is what they said in the papers. And also on the news, on the TV, which I watched because I was happy, and it was a big relief for me. The flaming people in their business suits, burnt orange in the morning bright blue sky across the river from where I lived. And I said, "Power to the people," like George Jackson must have said before he died. And that is how I felt when the World Trade Center blew up. Since I knew that my parents must be dead, and my brother, and my sister too. Which is how I fell in love with Osama bin Laden during the fall of that same year. And I didn't really care anymore that no one could even really understand, not even Mr. Theodore, who could and then he couldn't, who tried to, but also he was afraid. But as for me and all the Osamas who were all around the globe, we were ecstatic, stretching in our caves, dreaming, and then watching our TVs, telling George Bush to come and find us and to drain our swamps and kill us too. And that was how we felt, me and all my other brothers who had flown on all those planes, the dark-eyed revengers from the desert and from New York City too. And people didn't like it when I said I liked Osama bin Laden. And they especially didn't like it when I said I wanted to get married to him. But I liked him too much to stop liking him, and I liked him too much not to tell people it was true about my love for Osama bin Laden, for whom that I would cheer when I saw him on TV or saw his picture in a magazine, like Squeaky Fromm did with Charles Manson, who my friend Todd had met, and Todd thought they were all crazy, Charles Manson and Squeaky Fromm, and all the rest of the people who were called the family. But they were all a family, which meant there was love inside there too, even if you don't believe it about the psychotic people who were murderers and thieves. And my dad, Mr. Theodore, thought that my brother Osama was psychotic. But I thought that the worst thing was that he was rich, which was the only thing that was wrong with him, and maybe also his weird ideas about God. And people especially didn't like it when I hung his photos on my wall all over my apartment in Brooklyn in the crummy Polish building with the roaches and the junkies in the hall. And especially some of my friends didn't appreciate my great love for Osama, like Stuart and Ann, who got thrown out of Morocco because someone said they'd said weird things about the king. But I thought people were insulting Osama all the time, and it didn't seem right, like Stuart and Ann said about the Muslim world and how it was so bad, which is what people said everywhere, which was what I didn't care about since the Christian world seemed just as bad then too, which is when I fell in love with Osama bin Laden in September of the year of 2001, since he was tall like Abraham Lincoln, and he had my brother Jules's dark, sweet eyes, and I didn't exactly fall in love with him so much as I was concerned about his well-being, since so many people were trying to kill him, which came at a time when people said you couldn't say the shit you did, even my accountant, whose name was Harry Zellman, who wasn't afraid of anything. But he had a new look on his face, as if John Ashcroft had come right up to his door, and he couldn't say what I would say to everyone I met, how I hoped that Osama would someday finally win, whatever he was fighting for. And Mr. Theodore looked at the bright side, which was that I wasn't afraid like everybody else, since everybody seemed to fear Osama, the Muslim who was evil, and evolved into a monstrous new form up from his swamp. My brother, 10 years older and a foot taller than me, in the desert, in his cave, who was a fighter, which is where I thought I'd rather be, in the cave of Osama, where I'd cook the meals for him with pork chops and with bacon and some ham, so that we could be infidels together, married in our infidelity, me, the terrorist, and him, the awe-producing one, who also wanted someone to love and someone to hate, which made him just like me. Thank you.